Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is simple. We take complex, sprawling histories, stack up the source material articles, biographies, research, and distill it down to the essential, insightful nuggets you need to be truly well-informed.
Today, we are opening up the files on one of the most recognized and, quite frankly, most morally complicated figures in all of industrial history.
Ferdinand Porsche.
When you hear the name Porsche, you immediately picture the epitome of speed, luxury, and performance, the 911, the racing pedigree.
Right.
But the story of the man himself stretches across the entire volatile technological sweep of the tree. It's a foundational narrative that covers everything from experimental electric vehicles in the 1890s to the design of colossal tanks for the Nazi war machine.
We've been pouring through detailed historical documentary transcripts covering his life and career arc. Our objective today is to understand not just his technical genius, which was, it was undeniable, but the profound moral cost of that ambition.
It's a story where brilliant technology became inextricably entangled with, well, the darkest political realities of the time. Exactly.
This deep dive is for you, the listener, who appreciates the foundational stories behind modern industry. It's a dive into contradiction. How can one man invent a revolutionary, quiet, electric car and then 30 years later design a 65-ton tank destroyer? We're going to explore that entire arc.
And we are going to start at a place that completely shatters the modern perception of the Porsche.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before Ferdinand Porsche was associated with roaring high-performance gasoline engines and the pursuit of speed records, he was obsessed with and pioneering electricity. The crucial counterintuitive fact here is that the very first vehicles associated with his design philosophy, dating back to the late 19th century, were electric and hybrid.
That's it. It's the original Porsche and it ran on batteries.
To understand the genesis of this pioneering mind, we have to start with his origins. Born September 3, 1875 in Maffersdorf, a small town in Bohemia.
Right, and at the time, this was deep within the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Today, Maffersdorf is known as Vratislavice nad Nisou in the Czech Republic. But what's crucial, as our source materials emphasize, is its geographical position.
It was only about 10 kilometers from the newly established border of the German Empire.
Yeah, that proximity is a geographical foreshadowing of where his career would ultimately find its greatest and most destructive opportunity.
And he wasn't born into agrarian poverty or anything like that. His father, Anton Porsche, was a prosperous tinsmith and plumber running a robust business that employed, 24 people?
And this was the peak of the Second Industrial Revolution. So Anton was benefiting immensely from the demand for metal goods, appliances, and plumbing equipment as towns like Maffersdorf modernized.
But this prosperity came with immediate familial pressure. Ferdinand was the third child, but his older brother, Anton Jr., died tragically young in an accident in the family workshop.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly all that weight of succeeding the father, a figure described in the sources as a domineering and uncompromising character, it fell squarely onto Ferdinand.
So you have this immediate clash.
A huge clash. The clash between father and son defines the early Anton, conservative tinsmith, demanded Ferdinand learn the traditional trade of working with metal. But Ferdinand, he was witnessing the technological revolution happening outside the workshop walls, and his mind was fixed on something far more radical: plumbing.
We have to put this into the context of the Second Industrial Revolution, which really kicked off in the 1870s. When people talk about the First Industrial Revolution, they usually mean textiles and steam power.
Sure.
The second was fundamentally about modernity, mass production, home appliances, telecommunications, and most importantly for Porsche, electrification.
This is the time when people began to grasp the concept of personal transport beyond a horse or a bicycle. And while the petroleum-fueled motor car was patented by Carl Benz in 1905, the debate was far from...
Right. The fuel sources were wide open. Ethanol, steam, coal gas.
And when Porsche was just a boy, electricity came to Maf. This was
It wasn't for the homes initially, right?
Right.
It was specifically to power the large local textile factory.
Exactly. The sources paint this vivid picture of the 11-year-old Ferdinand just absolutely captivated, relentlessly peppering the workmen who came to install the grid with questions.
That is the moment of genesis for the engineer.
It really is. He immediately began tinkering. Within months, he had successfully rigged up a small battery circuit and lights in the attic of the family home.
And his father, Anton, saw this as a dangerous distraction.
A threat. A total threat to the predictable, profitable family.
But his practical skills spoke for themselves. The local textile mill owners, the Ginsky brothers, eventually intervened, validating Ferdinand's skill in wiring and creating small motors.
And the father, Anton, was sort of forced into a grudging acceptance. It was clear Ferdinand would not be taking over the family trade.
So Anton eventually pivoted, focusing his attention on Ferdinand's younger brother, Oscar, to maintain the family business lineage.
And this liberation, this is what allowed Ferdinand to make his decisive move in 1890. At age 18, he departed the small town of Maffersdorf for Vienna, the capital, which was experiencing a rapid, dazzling...
The Ginsky brothers, his early champions, helped him secure an apprenticeship with Billa Egger & Co., a major early electrical utility.
And while working there during the day, he studied electrical engineering at night at the Vienna University of Technology. But here's a key biographical: he never actually secured a formal...
He was an autodidact.
Completely. A practical engineer whose knowledge was gleaned from the workshop floor and the rapidly developing science of electrical current. He placed a higher value on application than academic, and that hands-on approach would define his entire...
So by 1897, while he's still honing his skills in Vienna, Porsche makes his first monumental contribution to automotive technology.
He successfully developed, built, and incorporated a wheel hub motor into an automobile chassis.
Okay, here's where the technical insight really delivers the aha moment. The wheel hub motor meant the power source. The motor was built directly into the wheel structure itself,
which eliminates the need for heavy, complex gearboxes, drive shafts, all that centralized transmission stuff to get power from a central engine to the wheel.
It was just technical elegance applied to the problem of motion.
It was. And if you look at many modern e-bikes or even advanced military vehicles and prototype electric cars today, they are revisiting this very same principle. He did it in 1897.
He was effectively eliminating mechanical complexity by applying electrical power directly at the point of action.
And this brilliance led directly to his next opportunity. In 1898, he was hired by Ludwig.
Loder was a pioneering carriage builder in Vienna who was looking to transition from horse-drawn vehicles to motorized transport.
And he had heard about Porsche's wheel hub innovation through his contacts in the electrical sector.
So for the next 8 years, the focus was entirely on electricity. This is the counterintuitive core of his early career.
Yes. Lohner and Porsche's creations in the late 1890s and early 1900s were predominantly electric vehicles and sophisticated hybrids. They were attempting to solve the range and weight problems inherent in early battery technology.
And the ultimate technical solution was the Lohner-Porsche mixed. Now, this was not a modern parallel hybrid where the engine and electric motor can work simultaneously to drive the wheels?
No, this was a serial hybrid design. The core of the vehicle was a petroleum-fueled engine, but that engine did not directly drive the wheels.
It acted solely as a generator.
Exactly. It powered 4 separate electric motors, 2 in the front wheel hubs, 2 in the rear that drove the vehicle. The petroleum provided the energy, but the movement was entirely electric.
Which would have dramatically cut down on the clatter and noise associated with early gasoline engines, a major advantage in cities.
A huge advantage. They showcased this innovation at the 1900 World Fair in Paris, which was basically the global stage for emerging. The mix attracted significant attention.
And they even drove a model in an endurance trial sponsored by the Automobile Club of Great Britain and Ireland in November 1900.
Right, and Porsche himself loved to demonstrate. He famously drove one all the way back to Maffersdorf to show off his success to his skeptical family in 1901.
So technically, the car was a success, fast, clean, and quiet for the era, but they ran into some fundamental roadblocks.
Systemic road. The primary one being the limitations of battery tech. The lead-acid batteries of the time were incredibly heavy, which reduced efficient range and required frequent, prolonged charging.
And the second roadblock was manufacturing. They just couldn't compete with the revolution being launched across.
Henry Ford.
We're talking Henry Ford, and the Model T Ford perfected the assembly line, driving the price of his standardized, mass-produced vehicle down dramatically.
And crucially, Ford's engine relied on petroleum, which was becoming increasingly unavailable, especially after the immense oil discovery in the U.S. and the development of modern refining tech.
So the widespread availability of cheap petrol infrastructure fundamentally undercut the need to invest in a complex, costly, and heavy electric infrastructure.
Yeah, Lohner and Porsche were technically brilliant, but they were defeated by scale, logistics, and resource abundance.
And adding to this, in 1902, Porsche was already engaging with the military establishment.
He was. He demonstrated his vehicles during Austro-Hungarian military maneuvers to Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the empire.
The Archduke was fascinated by the new technology, which led to Porsche's comfortable reservist posting, driving the Archduke around during his training.
This really highlights a crucial... The military, as a high-spending client, was always deeply embedded in Porsche's development path.
His personal life saw some stability during this period, however. In 1903, he married Aloysia Johanna Kais, known as Louise, after what was, by the standards of the time, a very lengthy courtship.
And their honeymoon says everything you need to know about Ferdinand Porsche's priority.
It really does. It wasn't a relaxing trip to the Mediterranean. It was a business tour of Austria, Italy, and France, dedicated entirely to meeting contacts and discussing the latest breakthroughs in motorized vehicle technology.
The man had an almost singular, all-consuming focus on engineering. They had 2 children, Louise in 1904 and Ferdinand, known as Ferry, in 1909.
But by 1906, the commercial reality of the mixed was unavoidable. Despite the technical success, the anticipated large government contract for military vehicles never materialized.
So Lohner, ever the pragmatist, saw the writing on the wall for electric cars and shifted his focus entirely to the emerging field of airship and air construction.
And just like that, the electric pioneer, recognizing the funding was drying up, made his move away from electrical power. He had to pivot toward the technology the largest customers, the military, were actively funding.
That pivot lands him at Austro-Daimler in 1906. This was an automobile company struggling to compete in the consumer market, even though they dabbled cars.
They brought in Porsche, specifically because they needed a technical jolt, someone who could make their cars faster and more competitive.
And he delivered immediately. He transitioned his skills from electric motors to refining the internal combustion engine, quickly developing new models that began winning speed trials across Central Europe before the decade was out.
The famous example is the Prince Heinrich Tour, right? A grueling 1,200-mile endurance race that was essentially the precursor to the modern German Grand Prix.
That's the one. A Porsche-designed model, the Prince Henry Austro-Daimler, sped to victory.
This is where we see his signature obsession with detail emerge. The source material mentions he famously insisted on covering all fastening nuts on the exterior panels of the Prince Henry car.
It sounds like a minor detail, but it was purely functional, reducing wind resistance to maximize speed. This obsession with aerodynamics was pioneering and would define all his future car design, from race cars to the Beetle.
But his career was always destined to be tied to the state. Daimler was a primary supplier to the massive Austro-Hungarian military.
So Porsche's focus quickly shifted. He started leveraging his engineering mind toward military hardware, specific heavy artillery.
Tugs were essentially powerful, purpose-built tracks designed to pull the increasingly large and heavy artillery guns being produced in the arms race leading up to World War I.
And this wasn't just about making a stronger engine. It was about designing a vehicle that could articulate massive weight over extremely difficult, unpaved terrain.
They developed several powerful models, starting with the M09 Titan, which was a robust early artillery track.
But the real step change was the M1200, so named because it was the first of their tractors to feature a 100-horsepower, significant output for heavy machines.
Porsche also diversified. This was the era of the great airship rivalry, led by Count Zeppelin in Germany. Military strategists across Europe believed massive airships were the future of large-scale transport and reconnaissance.
Yes, despite the Wright brothers' earlier flights.
So in 1909, the Austrian Ministry of War contracted Daimler to produce the engines for their new Parseval's airship.
And Porsche was the designer of the 70-horsepower four-cylinder motor that powered these vast hydrogen-filled machines. While airships proved highly vulnerable during WWI and were quickly phased out, Porsche's involvement shows how integrated he was across all aspects of imperial.
The transition from brilliant automotive designer to key military industrialist accelerated dramatically around 1913.
It did. A massive arms manufacturer in the Czech region, Škoda Works, took over the bulk of Daimler's military contracts.
And Porsche was highly valued.
Yeah.
In 1913, at the age of 37, he was co-opted into Škoda as design leader and operating executive, suddenly managing a vast team of 1,000.
And this timing was, for his career, both pivotal and, well, terrible for the world. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the man he used to drive, occurred in June 1914, triggering the first.
And Škoda Works instantly moved into full-scale war production.
Wartime demand forced him to rapidly expand his earlier artillery tug. This culminated in the massive M17 artillery tug, nicknamed the Goliath.
And the source material emphasizes that this was not a simple truck, but a massive articulated vehicle designed to haul the heaviest pieces of field artillery up treacherous mountain fronts in the Alps and through the mud of the Balkans.
His dedication to the empire's war effort earned him massive state recognition. In 1916, he received an honorary doctorate from the Vienna University of Technology, a degree he had never earned formally, and the Officer's Cross of the Emperor Franz, one of the empire's highest civilian honors.
So by 1918, Ferdinand Porsche was a decorated, highly influential, and nationally recognized technical authority, built entirely on the back of designing engines for state military apparatus.
The end of World War I, in 1918, brought the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, ending the political structure that had nurtured Porsche's career and making his immense military hardware suddenly obsolete.
The sources describe a period of immense turmoil. The empire fragmented into several new nations, and civil war and social chaos erupted across Central Europe.
Yeah, and the lucrative military contracts that had sustained Škoda and Daimler simply evaporated.
Porsche spent the late 1910s struggling to keep the factory he managed, the Wiener Neustadt subsidiary, economically viable during this period of revolutionary change. He managed to pivot back toward commercial car manufacturing, but financial pressures and creative differences with his bosses in Austria meant he started looking west towards Germany.
And Germany, despite the punitive measures of the Versailles Treaty and a period of hyperinflation, began a remarkable, if fragile, economic recovery. Starting around 19, that's when opportunity.
The job was chief engineer at the Daimler Motoren Gesellschaft in Stuttgart. Ironically, he was succeeding the son of the founder, Paul Daimler, who quit his post.
So Porsche, bringing his family with him, moved to Germany and took up the position.
Almost immediately, he was thrust into a corporate mega-merge, overseeing the combination of the engineering departments when Daimler merged with Benz in 1926, forming the industrial giant Daimler-Benz.
That would require immense managerial and organizational skill on top of his technical prowess.
As a manager, he was notoriously blunt. The accounts from the period describe him as having little effort to spare the feelings of staff if their work was subpar.
But crucially, he was fair. He always gave credit when it was due and never took ownership of subordinates' design. This reputation for directness, however, eventually clashed with corporate politics.
It did. In November 1928, Porsche was abruptly let go. He attempted to justify his department's high operating costs to the board by detailing the sheer revolutionary scope of the designs they had generated. Not just new cars, but high-performance engines for trucks and even naval submarines.
But the board, focused on immediate cost savings, decided his services were no longer worth the price.
Looking back at the documents, one thing is clear.
Yeah.
This was a brazen case of intellectual property exploitation.
Oh, absolutely. Daimler-Benz spent the next decade profiting immensely from the high-performance designs Porsche had created during his 5-year term. He felt betrayed, believing he had been used to provide a massive technical overhaul only to be cast aside once the foundation was...
At 53, Porsche was wealthy enough for a quiet life, but his drive was too restless. He was accustomed to the high-spending lifestyle his success in Austria and Germany had afforded him. He simply could not retire.
No. So he moved back to Austria in 1929, taking a position with a smaller manufacturer, Starwerk 8. In his single year there, he developed the Steyr-type XXX model, an innovative engine design that formed the technical basis of every Steyr car produced throughout the 1930s.
But the cycle repeated itself. He was fired again, just 1 year into a 3-year contract.
This time, the company directors blamed the catastrophic global financial environment, the Wall Street crash, and the ensuing Great Depression.
This repetitive use and discard dynamic became his greatest entrepreneurial frustration. He complained bitterly to his son, Ferry, that companies seemed to hire him just long enough to acquire his next-generation designs, then fire him and live off his intellectual property for the next decade.
And this realization was the catalyst for his defining move, founding his own independent engineering studio, Porsche Consultants, in Stuttgart in 1930, despite the terrible economic climate.
He wanted control of his own designs and the ability to freelance them to the highest bidder. To staff this venture, he famously poached some of his most promising engineers from his former employers, Daimler-Benz and Steyr.
The founding partnership of this new firm is vital context for the dark turns his life would take. He went into business with his son-in-law, Dr. Anton Piëch, a corporate lawyer, and critically, Adolf Rosenberg.
Rosenberger was a Jewish race driver, an astute businessman who provided a significant chunk of the initial capital required to establish the firm in the depressed economic environment of 1930.
So the company that would one day bear the Porsche name was literally founded on the capital and business acumen provided by a Jewish partner.
The stage is set for the 1930s, and the context quickly becomes dramatically and radically sinister. The Great Depression was hitting Germany harder than most nations, fostering immense political instability and ballooning support for extremist parties on both the left and the right.
By early 1933, the Nazis were the largest party, and Adolf Hitler was appointed chancellor, quickly establishing the one-party dictatorship of the Third Reich.
And this political shift would not only stabilize the German economy, but give Porsche the largest, most significant, and ultimately most compromising commission of his life.
Porsche made his allegiance clear immediately. The records show he anxiously sent Hitler a congratulatory telegram in February 1933, just days after Hitler assumed power, hoping to signal his willingness to collaborate and ensure continued state investment in the motor.
The relationship flourished based on mutual utility and a shared background. Both men were born within the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, but had risen to prominence in Germany.
And Hitler, needing industrial heroes, quickly championed Porsche as a paragon of German design and industrial prowess.
And Hitler had 3 interconnected, non-negotiable goals for the German economy: solve the Depression, build the revolutionary new road network, the Autobahn, and dramatically expand car ownership. In the early 1930s, only 1 in 50 Germans owned a car.
This brings us to the most famous contract in automotive, the commission to design the Volkswagen, the people's car.
The design stipulations were intense. Hitler demanded a car that could be purchased for under 1,000 Reichsmark, about $400 USD at the
A price point that proved impossible without.
This configuration established the long-standing, defining tradition of Volkswagen.
It did. However, this success was immediately shattered by moral ambiguity. The design bore an undeniable, striking similarity to the Tatra T97, designed by Hans Ludwinka in neighboring Czechoslovakia.
A patent dispute was already underway when the Nazis annexed Czechoslovakia in March 1939.
At that point, the dispute was simply dismissed. The Volkswagen project, a matter of state ideological pride, was just allowed.
Volkswagen only settled the patent dispute with Tatra years later, after the Second World War had ended, providing a clear example of the regime leveraging its power for corporate gain.
By 1938, the design was finalized, and Porsche was given the immense responsibility of overseeing the construction of the manufacturing plant. This wasn't just a factory. It was a planned town in north-central Germany.
Initially named the City of Strength through Joy Car at Wallersleben, today we know it as Wolfsburg.
And the official imagery from the cornerstone laying ceremony in May 1938 is damning. Pictures show Porsche standing right next to Hitler, flanked by dozens of high-ranking Nazi and SS officers wearing swastika armbands.
This was not a passive contractor. This was a national figurehead integrated into the highest circles of the regime's public relations effort.
We have to pause to examine how he built Wolfsburg, because it speaks to his industrial ambition. In 1936, Porsche visited the United States, primarily to...
While he consulted briefly with Chrysler, his main goal was touring Henry Ford's vast industrial complex.
He was captivated not by Ford's engine design, but by his management philosophy. The assembly line process combined with the Ford ethos, paying above-market wages to engender deep worker loyalty and production.
So he immediately applied these principles to both his engineering offices in Stuttgart and the massive new complex being erected at Wolfsburg. He was building the Nazi dream car using American capitalist industrial methods.
And his ties to the Nazi regime deepened significantly and proactively throughout the 1930s. In 1934, on Hitler's specific advice, Porsche formally applied for and received German citizenship, willingly superseding his Czech national.
He joined the Nazi Party in 1937, which by then was a near prerequisite for maintaining his position at the apex of German economics.
But his membership in the SS, the Schutzstaffel, is far more controversial and morally compromised.
Indeed. He joined the SS, the paramilitary wing that ran the concentration camp system, and was the ideological core of the regime. By the early 1940s, he had achieved the rank of...
For a civilian engineer, this was not just a bureaucratic formality or an honorary title. It represented active ideological integration. He was part of the organizational structure responsible for the worst atrocities of the Third Reich.
And this ambition fostered rank opportunity. We need to circle back to Adolf Rosenberger, the Jewish co-founder who provided the critical starting capital for the Porsche consultancy in 1930.
In 1935, Ferdinand and his son Ferries systematically took advantage of the rapidly escalating hostile environment for Jewish people in Germany. They forced Rosenberger out of the company,
effectively confiscating his shares and thereby allowing the Porsche family to profit directly from the regime's state-sponsored anti-Semitism.
Rosenberger managed to flee Germany for the United States, but the moral betrayal is clear. The sources confirm that Ferry Porsche later attempted to whitewash this. In his 1976 autobiography, he significantly skewed the narrative, portraying the transaction as a necessary, benign business arrangement,
obfuscating the family's aggressive, opportunistic behavior to seize full control of the firm. It's a deliberate attempt to bury the moral compromise at the foundation of the modern company.
Despite the massive investment in Wolfsburg and the immense state support for the Volkswagen dream, very few Beetles were actually produced for civilians before the war.
No. The invasion of Poland in 1939 and the subsequent shift to a total war economy meant car factories were instantly repurposed.
And Porsche, the inventor of electric cars and the designer of Austro-Hungarian artillery tugs, naturally pivoted back to his WWI expertise, military hardware.
The Wolfsburg plant, once completed, began manufacturing component parts for the Junkers Ju-88 multi-purpose aircraft and served as a major repair.
His skills were immediately called upon for the most challenging task of the early war, designing heavy tanks. Hitler's government asked for submissions for a new heavy tank, 45-ton machine equipped with devastating 88mm anti-tank.
And both Porsche and his competitor Henschel & Son Co. submitted designs.
Porsche's submission, the VK45.01P, was again wildly innovative, building on his century-old interest in electrification. It was a hybrid gasoline-electric tank.
Instead of a complex mechanical transmission, 2 gasoline engines generated electricity, which was then fed to electric motors driving the tracks.
It was technically brilliant, but too complex and ahead of its time for the brutal demand front. The sources detail specific the electrical insulation, and they were unreliable under combat conditions, prone to failure, and difficult to repair.
And the massive power draw under load also proved challenging.
Right. Ultimately, the Henschel design was chosen for the final mass-produced Tiger I tank because it was simpler, easier to manufacture rapidly, and more reliable.
However, the fact remains that Porsche designed a functional hybrid tank prototype in the early 1940s, again demonstrating his visionary, if often overambitious, approach.
And despite losing the main Tiger contract, one of his truly massive designs was selected for production, the Elephant Heavy Tank.
This was an enormous machine, weighing 65 tons and fitted with the largest anti-tank gun available to the Wehrmacht.
Only several dozen were produced, but they saw action at the largest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk.
Subsequent modified units of this machine were renamed the Ferdinand, euphemistically named after Porsche himself. This machine, a highly specialized heavy gun platform, is a direct intellectual descendant of the M17 Goliath artillery tug he designed for World War I.
And his war work even extended into the regime's grandiose, chilling colonial plan. In 1941, as part of the projected colonization of Lebensraum, the living space to be conquered in Eastern Europe, Porsche was involved in designing motors for large wind turbines.
They were for the Wind Power Research Company, intended for use on the Pontic-Caspian steppe. He was designing the infrastructure for a conquered continent.
All of this collaboration came with the highest honor. In September 1938, at the Nuremberg Rally, he was personally awarded the National Cross, the highest civilian honor given by the Nazi regime.
But the deepest, most indelible stain on his legacy began around 1940 at the Wolfsburg, the systematic use of slaves.
Under the Nazi regime's rigid racial hierarchy, those considered racially inferior Slavic people, including Poles and Czechs, were primary targets for forced industrial. Additionally, individuals deemed criminal from occupied territories like France and the Netherlands were shipped east to work in German factories.
The numbers initially minimized by the company were starkly different from the reality. While the Porsche firm initially claimed minimal use, modern historical analysis confirms that approximately 300 slave labor from occupied Europe were utilized at the Wolfsburg plant.
Especially as the war turned against.
Right. The timing is critical. The reliance on forced labor in German factories, including Porsche, peaked in 1944. Across the German economy, the use of forced and slave labor exceeded 2 million workers.
This reliance signaled the regime's growing desperation as native German manpower was exhausted by the fighting. Porsche's factories were integrated into this morally abhorrent system of human functioning as a vital cog in the machinery war.
The European War ended in May 1945. Like many top scientists and engineers affiliated with the Nazi regime, Porsche was immediately caught in a complex legal and political net. He was under immediate suspicion, but also recognized as a priceless technical asset.
He was arrested in the Baden region of Germany on December 15, 1945, for his wartime activities and membership in the SS, but his time as a prisoner was anything but typical.
He came to a highly unusual agreement with the French car maker Renault. Renault desperately needed design expertise to restart their domestic production, and they knew Porsche's reputation.
So Porsche, while technically detained, was contracted to undertake design consultancy work for the French government.
This created a bizarre, protracted situation that lasted 17 months. Porsche was shuttled between house arrest near Paris and Renault factories and treated as a valuable technical consultant during the day and a prisoner awaiting trial at night.
It perfectly illustrates the tension between his moral status and his technical value to post-war Europe.
The sources reveal that the Porsche family, in later years, suggested these charges were politically motivated by the French to force him to divulge his engineering secrets, specifically regarding the Volkswagen.
And while we can't fully dismiss the geopolitical angle, the facts of his SS membership and war work remain unchallenged.
His trial finally arrived in May 1947. The most serious charge related to the use of forced labor. Crucially, the testimony revealed that the German armaments minister, Albert Speer, had proactively appointed high-ranking Nazi overseers to specifically manage the slave labor assignments at key factories like Porsche.
The judges ultimately concluded that while his ethics were deeply compromised, Porsche had not been the direct decision-maker regarding the forced labor assignment, and, in a total war environment, had little practical choice but to conform to the regime's demand factory running.
He was released in October 1947, though the full denazification process required him to prove he was not an active supporter of the ideology took additional time.
In the meantime, the Allies were reorganizing the German economy, determined not to repeat the punitive economic mistakes of post-WWI. And Volkswagen's survival was secured not by market demand, but by immediate British military intervention.
The bulk of the VW factories were in the Western Allied occupation zone. The British military commander, Major Ivan Hurst, recognized the value of the design and immediately placed an order for tens of thousands of cars by the end of 1945.
This massive order ensured VW survived the transition and quickly emerged as a major post-war manufacturer. It was the British military that saved Hitler's car.
And ironically, the auto union factories, the racing company Porsche had helped dominate in the 1930s, were in the Soviet Eastern Zone. The Soviets took a far more punitive approach, shutting them down and dismantling their machinery.
Auto Union did survive, however, re-emerging in the South, eventually rebranding and evolving into Audi in the 1960s.
Ferdinand Porsche, now in his early 70s, was largely done with the mass production world of Volkswagen. The mantle passed entirely to his son, Ferry Porsche.
Right. Since 1944, to avoid the relentless Allied bombing of industrial Stuttgart, the Porsches had been working from a small property in Grimden, Carinthia, Austria.
Ferry returned to this isolated Grimden site, partly because the Allies had temporarily prohibited the restart of work in Stuttgart. And it was here, in this rural Austrian setting, that Ferry effectively hand-built the foundation of the elite brand we know today, the first Porsche 356.
The 356 was the launch pad for the elite Porsche brand. It incorporated plans Ferdinand had drawn up years earlier, partially realized in the Porsche 64 prototype, and critically, it was built primarily using chassis and engine parts derived from the Volkswagen design pioneered by his father.
So the car was conceptually Ferry's, but technically it was a realization of Ferdinand's design principle.
Ferdinand spent his final years back in Stuttgart. In 1950, he made a famous visit to the Wolfsburg plant with Ferry, where the Beetle was finally entering true mass production.
And Volkswagen granted him a small royalty on every Beetle sold, acknowledging his foundational design role.
Just weeks later, in late 1950, he suffered a major stroke that left him partially paralyzed. He died in a Stuttgart hospital on January 30th, 1951, at the age of 75.
And the final accounts of his life confirm a profound and perhaps calculated refusal to acknowledge the moral gravity of his service.
Even to the end, he claimed that Hitler had not known about the concentration camps or the Holocaust, suggesting he had merely contributed to building a greater Germany. This narrative of self-delusion, or maybe self-preservation, highlights a profound moral failure alongside his tech success.
At the time of Ferdinand's death, the future of the Porsche brand was an open question, relying on the success of the fledgling 356. But the legacy survived and flourished, transitioning from his military and mass-market designs to high-end performance.
The 356 was followed by the commercially successful Porsche 911, introduced in 1964, which established itself as one of the most iconic and enduring sports car designs of all time. This lineage, driven by Ferry and his team, became the face of the brand.
But when you look at sheer commercial volume, the most successful car Porsche was ever involved in designing remains the humble Volkswagen Beetle.
It was the first automobile in history to sell 20 million units, becoming a true global phenomenon, a symbol of post-war mobility in countries from Mexico to Australia.
And in a fascinating, strange full circle, the company that Ferdinand founded, now a major sports car manufacturer, formed a major financial partnership with Volkswagen, which counts Audi, the spiritual successor to his early auto union racing effort, as a subsidiary in 2009.
The entire structure of the modern German automotive empire stems directly from the web of contracts and designs Porsche X in the 1910s.
So how do we summarize this immense and complicated legacy? There is absolutely no denying his technical genius. He was one of the most original and accomplished engineers of the 20th century.
His innovations were truly visionary. His serial hybrid and electric vehicle designs were a century ahead of their time, only becoming feasible again with the advent of modern lithium-ion batteries and advanced microelectronics.
And his mechanical work was equally transformative. His heavy machinery expertise, adapted from WWI artillery tugs to the WWII Elephant, informed his understanding of robust, powerful engines, culminating in the air-cooled VW design that revolutionized mass transit for decades.
He adapted his expertise from massive military machines to the structure of the high-performance sports car seamlessly.
Yet, the conclusion is morally inescapable. The legacy is fundamentally poisoned by his deep, active associations with the Nazis, his membership in the SS, and the reliance on slave labor within his factory.
This places him in that deeply problematic cadre of brilliant German technical minds like Werner von Braun, who prioritized their professional success and the execution of their grand designs over any moral.
They often fall back on the argument that they had no choice, that someone else would simply have taken their place.
But our source materials conclude that in all these instances, including Porsche's opportunistic seizure of Rosenberger's shares, the desire for personal success, ambition, and professional prominence clearly overrode any form of ethical company. Porsche was a great designer, but a deeply, fundamentally flawed human being who actively collaborated with a criminal colonial regime.
So what does this all mean for us today? The story of Ferdinand Porsche forces us to confront the true cost of genius. If he claimed ignorance about the camps until the very end, as the sources suggest, is that genuine, powerful self-delusion, or is it simply calculated self-preservation after the fact?
It's a tension between moral accountability and technical contribution. We've established that the Porsche legacy rests on two foundational pillars: the elite, innovative, high-end sports cars and the universally accessible Volkswagen Beetle.
Now, consider the profound historical irony in the Beetle. It was the car explicitly designed to foster a vibrant, prosperous middle class of ethnically German people under the Nazi regime, a specific racialized ideological goal.
Yet that very car, due to its robust design and post-war adoption, became the global symbol of affordable mobility, mass production, and democratic design for the masses worldwide.
Think about the hidden moral foundation beneath everyday modern technology and ask yourself, can genius ever truly exist in a vacuum? Or are all innovations inextricably linked to the ethics and the funding of the regimes that facilitate them? We hope this deep dive gave you much to consider.